What if you grew up in a belief system that told you everything around you was an illusion? What if you were told everything that happened to you, from being sick to stubbing a toe to being bullied at school, was your fault for not knowing the truth? What if you were denied even the most basic health care, from pain pills to checkups to vaccinations? How do you unravel yourself from this belief system? And what happens when you do? My name is Hillary Alexander, and this is Leaving Christian Science. Welcome to episode 11 of Leaving Christian Science. Today I have Emmy, hi, who
Hello.
also is from the Ex-Christian Scientist Facebook group, and she has quite a story of her life in Christian Science, her family's life, and everything that comes along with that, as we know. So why don't you start from the beginning and tell us when Christian Science came into your family's life?
Totally. I'm at least fourth generation, potentially fifth, not entirely clear on that because as many CS individuals have mentioned, people don't really talk about death or people who have passed. So I know I'm at least fourth generation. And I also, sorry, I just want to preface before I get into like all the things that exist in my family. I am not going to be holding a lot of space for like they tried, because I don't feel like they did.
Yeah.
And I have that space in my psyche and in my soul to hold that they did their best and their best wasn't good enough. And I'm not going to do that today.
Yeah, I always get irritated when people say, "Well, everyone does their best." And I'm like, "No, they don't."
Yeah,
Not everybody does
exactly.
their best.
Yeah. I believe that they brought potentially they brought 100% of what they had, but also that 100% was not anywhere close to enough.
Yeah. And a lot of times people are just selfish and narcissistic and, that's not doing your best.
Yeah. So the way that my family came into it, I have my patrilineal side is where Christian Science comes from. My mother's side was Catholic, so I get all the awesome like Catholic guilt that was handed down generationally. And then I also have the Christian Science everything passed down from that direction. My parents are the last of their generation that is still Christian Science in my father's family. And my grandmother is still in very deeply in CS, though neither party physically goes to church anymore. They are still very deeply within it.
True believers, yeah. So describe the childhood atmosphere in your
Whew.
household. What was your household like growing up?
It was barely controlled chaos. I am the oldest of four, and there's 10 years between myself and the youngest. So
Mm.
it's me, 4 years later, the next one, 18 months later, the third, and then 4 years after the third is the fourth. Um, we were homeschooled. I was pulled out of public school in kindergarten, maybe 3 months in,
Mm.
because I am autistic and ADHD, though, of course, that was never acknowledged. I was a very bright child, and the person who was my babysitter slash daycare provider, who was also a member of the church, recognized that I had the capability to learn very, very young. So I went into kindergarten knowing how to read at like a third grade level
Wow.
and doing like starting basic multiplication, like what the times tables are, which was way beyond what kindergarten had provided. So I was bored out of my mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I do think it was correct that my parents pulled me out in order to give me better education. And they did actually accomplish that until about fourth grade. And then it just went downhill from there.
Mm.
So I have kind of a mixed experience around like scholastic stuff because I don't have a lot of experience around like the seeing of school and seeing other people. So when I say like my family did Christian Science to the extreme, I really do mean that, because there was no external input of people being like, wait a second, what?
Yeah. So you were homeschooled straight through. You never went back to
Yeah,
school.
no, never went.
Wow.
I asked several times, but my mother is a covert narcissist, and so that it was very much like an attack against her as a
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
Um, and also they put the guilt trip on me that if I went to school, I would have to get shots. I would have to go to the doctor. I'd have to get a physical, which was not entirely 100% true.
Yeah.
And that by doing that, by me going to public school, other people at the school would then go, who are your siblings? Why aren't they in school? And so my choice to go back to school would force my siblings into the same position, even though like at the time they were like, I don't know, what's it like?
Yeah.
And there was the claim that I only wanted to do it because I wanted to have friends.
Like that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
That's an accusation as if it's like a bad impulse to want friends.
Right.
So you use the
So
term covert
mhm.
narcissist. Can you describe what that
Yeah,
is?
totally. So there's covert and there's overt. Overt narcissism or malignant narcissism is what we tend to see out of, for example, a certain orange president.
Right.
Um, and where it's very grandiose, like the narcissism period has grandiosity to it. Covert is manipulative on
Mm,
a really extreme level. It's a very like spider web master, like they pull strings and they know how to manipulate you with your empathy.
yeah.
Whereas a overt narcissist is going to be like, I'm the best thing in the world, how dare you question me? A
Yeah.
covert narcissist is going to go, I'm just the worst person in the world, pity me, rescue me from my emotions. And that's the big difference, because it's a different kind of manipulation. It's far more insidious in my opinion, and it really does lean on your inherent empathy to work. So covert narcissists do not work on other covert narcissists. They do not
Mm,
work on overt narcissists. They do work on deeply empathetic individuals.
yeah, I would imagine that my guest Emily, said that her mother
Mhm.
was a narcissist and mine
Yeah.
was. I would imagine that covert would definitely describe a
Yeah.
lot of these
Yeah.
mothers, certainly. Yeah.
And also, yeah, and there's also some argument that, so this is largely my belief, but also I have many people in my corner who are in the mental health industry, and I've checked this opinion against them, and they're like, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And so when you endure narcissistic abuse, period, full stop, your inherent trauma becomes either also narcissism or something that looks like borderline personality disorder, where you and so the difference here too is that narcissists love bomb, where they're like, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you, you're amazing, you're amazing, you're amazing. And then they, once they have their claws in you, that like pulls you into their sphere. Borderline is stay away, stay away, stay away, I'm the worst in the world, and I know that about myself because of the narcissist's behavior. So let me keep people away because I'm convinced I'm terrible.
Mm,
And if anyone gets in, they're going to know just how bad of a person I am. And that will confirm everything I'm so afraid of being true, that I cannot bear that confirmation. So stay away.
wow.
So yeah, it's, and like healing is finding out that you have both in different quantities, and that it's valid for you to explore those spaces and find healing.
Yeah. So I'm assuming you had a radical reliance household,
Yes.
which
And
means no medical
yes,
intervention.
no, none whatsoever. Even insofar as ice on a burn, we were, or putting cold water on a burn was not acceptable. Which was really confusing because there was some that would be allowed and some that wouldn't be allowed. It would be,
And there's no rhyme or reason to it.
yeah, it
Yeah.
didn't make sense. So it was like, yeah, you can't put ice on a burn, but your sibling has a sunburn that's peeling. We're going to put aloe on it. Okay. Lotion. How is like putting lotion on dry skin not also this. Like you've said that it's all the same, that aspirin, chemotherapy, and ice are all the same thing as far as God is concerned. So how is this allowed? But that's not.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I grew up with that same sort of bizarre hypocrisy where, my mother wore contact lenses, we all went to the dentist.
Yeah.
She
So
had
we
skin
actually didn't.
cancers removed, but
I didn't go to the dentist for the first time until I was 10.
mm,
And unfortunately, that was a deeply traumatic event because I am hypermobile, which is often comorbid with neurodiversity. And that also tends to come with being resistant to painkillers like Novocaine and lidocaine.
oh boy.
So I had to have a molar removed because it was so deeply like cavity filled that it just needed to be removed. Also, I have a very tiny mouth, and so they decided to pull it, and that was excruciating because I did not have proper pain
Oh,
management, and
yeah.
also that was at the dentist's insistence in the first place that I even had pain management to begin with. And then I didn't get glasses until I was 15 or 16, because I failed the driver's test with the vision.
Oh, wow.
And then I was responsible for paying for my own optometrist appointment and glasses.
Ugh. What was it
So
like the first time you saw clearly? How did that
um
feel?
like it's like I'm looking at the background behind you, like right above your eye, like right around here. It's that it's fuzzy, right? That's how everything was.
Yeah.
I was like, holy crap, you can see leaves on trees from a distance.
Wow.
What? It's like going from like Sega Lara Croft to modern video games and being
Mhm.
like, wow, the rendering's so good.
So
So
I'm
yeah.
interested to know, as far as your relationship with the belief system of Christian Science as a child, were
Mhm.
you all in? Were you questioning?
No, I have some memories that I've been unlocking through therapy. Um, I very genuinely believe that I started questioning around the age of like 7 or 8
Mm,
because things just didn't make sense. And being an autistic kid, knowing rules and like that they're always consistent and that like gravity always makes things fall at a specific state of motion. Um, I liked that. And so these rules constantly changing was deeply confusing and very upsetting. So I started questioning them out loud. And initially, I had a Sunday school teacher that was just part of the community. And she was a very kind woman. She worked in PE at the local middle school.
hmm.
And she was trying really hard, but I would do things like say, well, why didn't Noah pray about the rain and God just fixed the rain? God is capable of anything, you said. Why couldn't he just, why did he have to build a boat?
Yeah.
And it was, well, that's what God led him to do. Like God told Noah, that's what he did. Like God provides the need, provides for the need before the need is known. And which went into really silly places. Like I specifically recall my father pulling a container of sour cream out of the fridge that he had forgotten he purchased, and we were out of sour cream, and he was like, see, God provides for the need before the need is known. I was like, it's fucking sour cream, bitch.
Wow.
Like,
And you saw through that, I'm sure.
oh
Yeah, as a
yeah, it
smart
was.
kid.
Yeah. Well, and then when I started doing all that questioning, my father at the time was the Sunday school teacher for like the upper class, like high school age. And so I got pulled into that earlier because it's like, oh, she's asking hard questions I don't have the answer to. Go to your father, child. And I figured out really quickly that the answer is always God is love.
Yeah.
Or because there is no trigger warning, there
Right, right.
is no substance and matter, like whatever the phrase, there's a term in psychology and philosophy called a thought terminating cliche. And like, essentially, God has a plan is a thought terminating cliche. The agnostic version of it is that it is what it is.
Right.
And it's like, okay, stop thinking about it. And so I would just throw one of those thought terminating cliches out, and I genuinely slept. I would sleep through Sunday school and I would just rest my eyes like this and have my eyes closed and barely pay attention. And then as soon as he would say, what's this? I'd be like, God is love. So mad. But the answer was correct.
Yeah.
Because it's a
That's
thought
always the
terminating
answer.
cliche.
Yeah. That's the answer to everything.
Yeah. So I was questioning pretty early. And then so around then, family things were a little tumultuous. So I lived in a townhome with my parents and my 3 siblings. So 2-bedroom townhome. And we were 100% there under the grace and like generosity of my grandmother. She owned the row of townhomes and lived in the one right next to us. And my father was in an MLM, and absolutely we did not have money. And there were regular times that she purchased our groceries, she paid our electricity bill or our water bill. My parents put her in extreme debt.
Mm.
And and they will never pay it back. There's no way. And so she's why we survived. Without a doubt, there would have been other people who stepped in legally in order to protect us had she not done that. So I have gratitude toward her and also frustration toward her, because it would have been a better situation for us to not be in that home.
Yeah, unfortunately, she kind of enabled
Yeah,
what
100%.
happened. Yeah.
And that makes sense with her life story. My grandfather, her husband, was potentially also an autistic person who was undiagnosed and unmanaged, unregulated, and also possibly an overt narcissist.
Mm.
And he was raised by a mentally ill mother himself. And that's one direction that CS comes through, because both of them were CS when they met. And also my family has a history of, that line of my family has a history of really fast meeting and marriage. My grandparents knew each other for 10 days before they got married.
Wow.
And my parents knew each other for 3 months before they got married. I was the weirdo in waiting a year. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about I mean, I'm kind of putting words into your mouth, but
Oh, you're good.
another person being coerced into supporting the family, because that happened in my family.
Really?
I was just
Yeah.
thinking the other day, my mother, covert narcissist, I'll call her that now because that seems to fit. At one point, she was making a basic living as a journalist for the Christian Science Monitor. She was their
Mhm.
music reviewer.
Yeah.
But her dream was always to make a living off of her music. She was also a musician and a, composer of jazz and stuff like that. And that was her dream. And it was, this elusive dream that never came true. And at one point, she convinced the very wealthy sister of a friend to become like a patron of the arts and to just support us so she could quit
Yeah.
all other work, focus only on the music. And I think this went on for more than a couple of years. This was my junior high school
Wow.
life, was this woman that we barely knew giving us this monthly
That
check.
is an incredible level of persuasion. Damn.
Yeah, and, my memory of that time, which my mother later completely denied any of this
Of
ever
course.
happened,
Yeah.
was that my mother would get this check and she would spend it all immediately on, like, some new piece of music equipment that was super important to have,
Yep.
or recording equipment or microphone or piano or something, and then we would have no money for the entire month,
Yeah.
and there would be no food, and there
Yeah.
would be no money for anything that we needed.
My parents did that with tech gadgets.
Yeah.
Apple specifically. Like I have a personal vendetta against Apple based off of my parents' behavior.
Yeah, I'm very bitter about it because that was real intense poverty. Like, literally, let's make this big soup
Yeah.
and we're just going to eat that for like a week.
Yep.
And we're going to eat it 3 times a day and it's going to run out and we're going to add water to it. I mean, that's how bad it was for
No,
years. This
I
went on for
fully
about
believe
3
you.
years.
I fully believe you and I deeply empathize and understand because
Yeah.
like I have in my personal adult life been that poor too. Like that was just how you had to make ends meet. And it was because we were just that poor, not because we made poor decisions.
It's a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. But and there's it's challenging because you have a tiny bit of gratitude, like, oh, thank God I know how to handle this.
Hmm.
But also like this overwhelming boulder of emotion that I shouldn't have to know this. I
Exactly.
shouldn't currently have to know this, and I should certainly not know this from 10 years old.
Yeah.
Deeply inappropriate.
Yeah. And the amount of anxiety that I had, which is in my little journals, it's all written there about, I mean, thankfully, we always had a roof over our head, but the wolves were always at the door. You
Yes.
know, we were always minutes away from things being shut off or being evicted. And it
Right.
was
Which just
terrifying.
perpetuates this like ingrained belief in the cult, which I do believe it's a cult.
Yeah.
Um, because it's like when you're constantly on that brink of failure, everything feels like a success when it happens.
Yeah.
And when you can put the blame for that failure on error or someone or malignant matter or a malicious mind, whatever phrasing I've intentionally lost a lot of the phrasing.
Yeah.
um is it like that will absolutely have you feeling like you have more wins than you do, is like when you overcome that hurdle that you put in your own path, then you're like, look at how good I run. And it's like, no, look at your
Yeah.
shirt all the time.
And the worst part is, I bet your parents and I bet my mother convinced themselves that they had a demonstration of supply by coercing these people into
All the time.
paying for their lifetime.
Yeah.
That's just so horrendous.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
with us eventually, because this wasn't a grandmother, this was just like barely a family friend, she got fed up and she cut us off.
Yeah.
And I remember my mother's intense bitterness and anger about that.
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
My so I have a similar termination of support in a odd way, in that my father eventually started working again as a printer, like on like essentially making all the um like the junk mail that you get
Mm,
from like real estate agents and stuff. He printed that stuff. And also, as a child, I would be partially responsible for helping around contract labor through my mother's social security number, doing child labor,
oh,
putting
wow.
stickers on dots to send out these mail things, and in order to make money for the family. And eventually, I did get some portion of that, but the portion that I got was then immediately turned around into, oh, I need shampoo, because my parents ceased to pay for my shampoo or my tampons
Yeah.
or clothing. And because, well, you have money, you can spend it on that. Um, so yeah, and it's also like, and our money problems started early. I have a memory sometime around the age of like 8, where my parents pulled me by myself after pulling my younger sibling, who was 4 years younger than me, so they would have been about 4 at the time, into their bedroom. And then they left and they came out and they were crying, and then they sent me in and I went in and my mother was crying and my father looked angry, and they asked me if they could use the money out of my piggy bank that I had earned by weeding gardens for my grandmother on the apartments. I had earned about $100 or so, maybe a little more, and my younger sibling had earned about 80. This is 1990s dollars. And so, and that was enough money to pay our electricity bill and our water bill. And
Hmm.
they were very insistent that they would pay us back as soon as they could. Never saw the money. And when I referred to it later, like as a teenager, my mother's like, that never happened,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
very common with narcissism, is that
Yeah.
they write their own story. Like episode 10, I can't remember his name. um
Todd,
that
I think. Yeah.
Todd, yeah, yeah. That he said like that they will create their own story and believe it, that they drink their own Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
And and like that is kind of how brains work in general.
Hmm.
You believe your perception, and their perception is deeply skewed away from reality. So
Yeah. So when you were enduring this as a child, I'm not even going to say living, I'm going to say
yeah,
enduring.
yeah, it was not living.
Yeah.
I was
Or
deeply suicidal as a child.
me too. Me too. I first wanted to do that when I was 7 years old. Yeah, that was the first time it occurred to me, "Hey, I could make all of this stop."
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so when you were enduring all of this, were you aware that what was happening to you was not normal or right, and you were just trying to get away as soon as you could, or did it seem normal to you?
So yes and no. I volunteered with a place called Ponyland. It was a volunteer organization that had horses, and there were lots of kids. And the owner of that organization took me under her wing. I looked a lot like her, and a lot of people assumed I was her daughter.
Mm,
And I had a deep desire for that to be true. And she definitely had an impact on me around like standing up to my parents for certain things. Um, and then there were just other kids around, so they would ask me about my life. I would see them with their parents. It wasn't the same, and I was deeply confused by that and envious, so envious.
yeah.
And absolutely. And then with my cousins, like my cousins also on my father's side, some of them were raised within Christian Science for a little while, but their parents were actively deconstructing and moving away from Christian Science. And so I watched that happen, and I was like, why can't we do that? Why can't we do that? What's so you can just you can do what you want? Okay. So so I I absolutely recognize that this was weird. Everyone told me this was weird, and I didn't disagree with them. It was around 8 or 9 that I started saying my family is Christian Scientist, not I am a Christian
Mm,
Scientist. And it was around 9 that I was like, I'm not a Christian Scientist.
wow, good for
I need
you.
to figure out what I am. And like conversion was a thing that like I knew existed. My mother very adamantly was like, I was a Catholic, but I never actually believed that. So I found Christian Science through your father. And I was like, wow, this is what I've always believed and didn't have words for.
Mm,
So that's her claim on why she converted to Christian Science, is that it all made sense, which makes sense because she's a covert narcissist. And so,
totally.
yeah, of course, this is what you've always believed, like that what you say is what's true. Okay, good for you. So I was like, well, that's how you do it then. That's how you convert away. You realize that this is not what fits for me, and you go find something else that does. So being homeschooled, I was taught very early, one of the factors around homeschool for those who haven't been is that you learn how to learn. Like genuinely homeschool is not a bad thing as long as you have a good curriculum and you make sure your children socialize outside of homeschool. But so I took the time because I had the internet now and I also had the library, and my parents would take us to the library and just kind of let us loose. And so I could just go to the religion area, and I'm a speed reader, so
Mm,
I sight read. I can read very, very quickly. Um, and like to put it into perspective, I read the seventh Harry Potter book in 2 days.
wow.
Um, yeah, and so I could just digest a lot of information really, really fast. So I looked into Buddhism, I looked into Hinduism, I looked into Catholicism. I figured out pretty quickly that Christianity, full stop, was not for me. And then I started looking into more Eastern religions, and then I found neo-paganism, which at the time I called Wicca. I do not identify as Wiccan, but and no pain or shame to those who do, but it wasn't what fit for me.
Mhm.
So now I practice primarily as like a solitary pagan, and just do what feels right and makes me feel close to Dios, as I call them, because I don't like the term God anymore because it's a very Christo way of thinking of God. So Dios is kind of, to me, this amalgamation of understanding. Not
Mm,
it's every seed from every religion that exists, and I choose this particular path to meet him.
yeah.
And so I figured that out. I started getting into the pagan communities online, which was not 100% safe. I was 10. And thankfully, there were enough like actual good adults in those forums to be like, oh, child, stop. Stop talking about this. Children are present, like kind of activity. And I'm very grateful to those people for just being good people.
Yeah.
And they very much encouraged me not to choose a doctrine, but to figure out what I believe and then apply that. So I had a lot of really good encouragement, and some of those people I'm still present with and I still talk to on a semi-regular basis. And then when I was about 11 or so, my mother was telling me about my uncle and my aunt. I'm very sorry if you can hear my mowers.
Nope, I can.
My uncle and my aunt had chosen to leave the church, and they had told my grandmother. My grandmother at the time still lived next door to us, so she told my mother, and my mother was telling me. And this is a very, very common activity. I know way too much and way inappropriate details about my aunts and uncles' sex life or their financial states or what problems my cousins were having, because my mother would just use me as her mini therapist. And so I was there massaging my mother's feet, and she told me, oh, your uncle and your aunt are leaving the church, but I'm sure your grandmother still loves them. And it was in that tone that made it very clear that she was questioning whether my grandmother could love them.
Or should.
Yeah, exactly. And so I immediately got very nervous, because what does a child want more than their mother's unconditional love? And so I asked very timidly, would you love me if I wasn't a Christian Scientist? And she goes, why? What are you?
Yeah.
And I went, I don't know. And she was like, I think you do. And I was like, maybe Wiccan? And she was like, oh, you want to dance naked and do drugs with people? I was like, whoa, I'm 11.
Yeah.
No, I want to not be a Christian Scientist. So that began what what I like very much title as like the persecution of myself around my religious choices. So that was when I stopped being allowed to be in Sunday school and was forced to be in service every Sunday and every Wednesday. Wasn't allowed to read any books that were not science and health or the Bible outside of school. And I wasn't allowed to like read all of the books for my school. I had to read them chapter by chapter slowly. And only as much as I was allowed to read or had to read for that assignment. And then I was at one point, when I was 12, old enough to be part of the mother church. My parents forced me to pay my own money to become a member of the mother church and become a member of the board of directors for the church, because the church was dying, our local branch. And they needed another physical body in order to have an actual what's the term, like census, like enough
Quorum
people.
or
Yeah, quorum. Yeah, to have enough people for it to be a church, not a society. And at that point, what that meant is that my parents, myself, and my grandmother were 3/4 of the board. So and yeah, so my mother was treasurer at one point. She was also first reader and second reader at different times. And we like genuinely, my family was probably about half of the church's congregation. And we had members start to pass just from old age, and others left because they moved or because it didn't align anymore. And so the church just slowly died, and eventually the decision was made, and I was like, boom, do it, to sell the church to another congregation, which is still there and thriving. I'm so happy for them, because that building is actually in good use now. And they, sorry, they did their thing, and they did a good job with creating a congregation and a good space in that church building. and the money was donated half to the Mother Church and half to Principia.
Mm.
My parents were also very insistent that they wanted me to remain a Christian Scientist, at least on the surface, partially because they were hopeful that I would get a scholarship to Principia.
Oh,
And I mean, maybe, but what would that education have been worth at this point?
yeah. So
Um,
so what you describe as the persecution period, was
yeah.
it like did it just sort of happen? Or, I mean, what was your perception at the time? Did you know that that
So
was what was going on?
so my mother was like, in the moment that this happened, my mother was like, go to your room and your father and I will deal with you later. Because that one of the factors around covert, well, just narcissism, period, is that they do this thing called triangulation. So it's
Yeah.
me and them versus you. And they're always trying to get other people on their side.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And and against you. And if they're with you, it's because they want you against someone else. And so she got my father on side. My father, for his, like, to his credit, did try to understand. He wanted to know what drew me to paganism and away from Christian Science, because from his perspective, he was like, you're turning away from the sun and looking into darkness. And I was like, that's how you use light. You don't stare into the sun.
There you go.
Like, light illuminates from behind you so you can see where you're going. That your metaphor makes no sense. And but he tried to understand, and I tried to explain to him, like, the fallacy, like, look, it, like, evidence shows it doesn't work, or at least it doesn't work for me. And by your book, if I say no, you have a responsibility to take care of me anyway. Like, and he was like, yeah, okay, sure. And so he tried as much as he could, but my mother, being the convert, had this, like, responsibility in my mind of being like the perfect Christian Scientist. She was the mother of a battle, like a little gaggle of Christian Scientists, and their being good Christian Scientists as children was evidence that she was a good Christian Scientist.
Yeah.
And so I had to do what my siblings and I called the perfect family performance, the PFP. That everything was always great. Everything was fine. No, we're doing amazing. Thank you for your concern. And that was very inaccurate to my lived reality. And it was lying all the time, which I'd been told multiple times was wrong.
Right.
And in fact, a sin on some level, because my mother, for all of her being like, we don't have sin, she was like, that's bad, and bad is almost like sin if we had some. This is my sin, where I would put it if I had any. And so she very much, like, shoved me back into the little CS box, and it was stifling.
Yeah. There's one thing I've learned from doing this podcast is that one of the things I had been proud of in Christian Science was the fact that we didn't really have sin. We certainly didn't have original sin or anything like that.
Yeah.
And to me, that was, I was so proud of that. And now I've come to realize, especially from doing this, the series, is that, well, we did have sin. We just didn't call it sin.
We called it error.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
was still there. There was still something to feel bad about.
Mortal mind.
Who are we
Yeah.
kidding?
Yeah, exactly. And so I wasn't allowed to practice outright anytime so when I say, like, the persecution period, I mean, like, I wasn't allowed to take out the trash and be outside for any longer than it took to walk to and from.
Man,
The
that's so
idea,
abusive. Jesus.
yeah, it is a like, it's like a boa constrictor on your expression. um Anytime you express yourself in the tiniest way and get rebuffed, and you go, oh God, and you collapse in further, it constricts you deeper.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like, because I wasn't allowed to meditate. I wasn't allowed to, and also around this time I became the primary caregiver of my siblings. My
Mm,
mother went to work, my father was already working, they worked at the same company, so they worked the same hours pretty much. And so, and like, up until that point, I was my mother's primary caregiver. And to a degree at that point, my siblings too. I started cooking at the age of 7. And I was responsible by the age of 11 or 12, responsible almost 100% for the house's cleanliness. And my parents are hoarders.
Mm.
Like, so there's no winning. And so there's only failure. And there's a point at which you just hit a wall where you go, well, I'm not going to try.
Yeah.
They're like, trying doesn't work. Doing it only gets me like, oh, see, you could do it if you try. And there's never a point at which I win. So
It's
I'm going
never
to
good
stop
enough.
playing.
So why bother? Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then also like, so another thing that just didn't make sense and that I got into a lot of trouble for is that my mom is very overweight. Is still, though now she is receiving medical care for diabetes. And so she was diabetic pretty much my whole life. I can look at pictures and be like, oh, that's stereotypical signs. And I was the one, because she couldn't get off the couch. I was the one who went and got her food and sweet tea and rubbed her feet and took care, like helped her physically lift herself off the couch at 8, 9, 10.
Mm.
And that is a physically endurant thing. And then also, like, you can't go anywhere. You can't do anything because you are physically taking care of a grown adult. So I couldn't go over and see friends for like a weekend. I couldn't leave the house for any genuine length of time. Who would take care of the kids? So, like, there was an incredible demand on my physical body to take care of her physical body while ignoring that either one existed.
Right.
And so and this is the other thing with narcissists in general, it's always like oppression Olympics,
Yeah.
that it's like, I jumped higher or I had a worse night's sleep than you did. So my mother was a light sleeper and probably like definitely had sleep apnea and stuff like that just from her weight, and would wake up in the middle of the night. My father snored and she would wake me up for me to rub her feet until she went back to sleep.
Mm.
That could take an hour or more. And also she's in pain and her feet itch, and I'm like, why don't you just pray about it?
Yeah.
And she's like, well, it's not working. I am praying. Okay.
It's not
Sure.
about the physical healing.
Right. And then it was also like, why doesn't she just pray her weight away? If it's such a problem and she doesn't like it, why does she just pray about it? Why does she have to go on a diet? And so it was just this constant, like, weird, like, it never made sense because it doesn't make sense. Like, it's not
Yeah.
even, there's no way to make sense out of chaos.
Yeah.
You can't organize it. And so it was just deeply frustrating and confusing. So around 14, 15, 16 is when I actually started having friends. The church had closed at this point. I was still kind of flying under the radar. I wasn't really saying out loud that I was pagan, but I did have an altar on my dresser. I practiced quietly, privately. I found little ways to practice, and most of it was actually, I have a very, very detailed inner world of like play pretend in my mind. It's one of the upsides, I guess, of being ADHD and autistic. Is that I just have a very rich inner world. And
Yeah.
so I created safe places, a mind palace of sorts. And that was where I escaped to when I wasn't escaping into books. And when I did escape into books, it was things like books by Tamora Pierce, which especially any women, but anyone who is wanting to see like good female role models in teenagerhood and people standing up against bullies. Tamora Pierce is definitely an author to listen to or
That's
read.
great.
And so and like, I'm very grateful my grandmother was the one who bought me those books, and they are polytheistic books. And so I did have like outlets, but they were not 100% healthy. And in adulthood, a lot of those have become somewhat toxic. I can fall into a world and disappear for 3-4 days and be completely absent from walking life. And it is very hard sometimes to pull myself out of that, especially when anything's bad at the moment, either physically, mentally, or emotionally. My
Yeah.
dissociative tendencies are pretty extreme. I fall asleep while driving sometimes if I'm in a
Wow.
bad space.
Yeah, I'll say that I definitely share that rich inner life need, because my main memory of my childhood, because my one sibling is 10 years older than me, so she was gone after I was about 8 years old. So my
Mhm.
main memory of any time after that was being very, very much alone,
Yeah,
because my mother would work and I would be alone in our little apartment all night while she worked, and I would listen to records. We didn't have a TV either. And I
yeah,
just developed this, I would tell myself stories and make up little plays, and
yeah.
that was how I survived, you know?
Absolutely, yes. And also there's a line from a song. One of the ways I express myself is through sharing music with other people.
Mm.
And the lyricism, I really love heavily lyricized music. Um, one of the lyrics I'm thinking of is, "Have you ever been alone in a crowded room?" And that was really and truly my childhood experience,
Yeah.
is that I was very aware of how incredibly alone I was at all times. And that is a horrific reality to live in. And also at the same time, you kind of think everybody else is this way too. Like everyone else is walking around super isolated and alone while putting on this happy front.
Especially with
And
social media, there's a lot of
yeah,
fakery.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so like it wasn't until I was in my teens and I started making friends that then they started sharing with me, "Oh no, my mom's terrible." I'm like, "Mine too." "Tell me about how horrible your mother is." And then I would tell them sometimes what I thought were funny stories, and they would go, "Oh my God." The one that really sealed the deal on me understanding like how abused I was is that we were at my friend's house, one of my friends, who's I will tell a story about in a little bit. And it was just a bunch of us, and we were playing Trauma Olympics. And
Yeah.
so it
One
was
of my
who has the
favorites.
worst, yeah, it was who has the worst parents. And one of my friends went, "Well, my mom drinks a bottle and a half of wine every night." And I was like, "Oh man, that sucks. Like your mom's an alcoholic, definitely." And then I was like, "My mom has me shave her legs so she can bang my father."
Oh,
And then
Jesus.
everyone went silent
Yeah.
except for the alcoholics child. And she went, "Ha," and pointed at me. And I was like, oh, mine's worst. Uh-oh.
Yeah. I
And
won, but,
I won the worst prize. Um, so yeah, and the friend's house that we were at is so the most poignant example I have of the neglect, especially medically, was that when I was 17, I had a boyfriend. This was around 2008, 2009, which is when swine flu came about. And my boyfriend was public schooled, and we definitely made out a lot. And he ended up contracting not true swine flu, but like the bastard cousin of it that was also going around.
mm,
And he ended up going into the hospital to get like IV and hydration and some anti-nausea stuff. And he was sick for like a good 2 weeks. And I got sick about 3 days after he did. And I was like, "Oh God, I'm pretty sure this is the same thing." And he had to go get medical care. And one of the symptoms was running a really, really high fever. And we had acquired at some point a thermometer. And so I had that thermometer. And I, at one point, so in this too, my parents were of the opinion that I was just faking it, that I was trying to get out of doing chores and get
oh
out of
boy.
being responsible, get out of doing school, which is stupid because it's not like school keeps going without me. And I was gonna have to make it up anyway. Um, and so I was incredibly ill, crawling from the air mattress that I slept on because my parents got rid of my bed at one point. Because they're like, "Well, you're gonna move out in a couple of years anyway. We can just get rid of this bed." And and so I was crawling from my air mattress to the shower, to crawl into the shower and lay in the bottom of the shower to try and control my fever. And I made I was aware of making a call in my head that I had Googled what the point of no return is for a fever before you hit brain damage.
Yeah.
And I had made the decision that if I hit that line, I would call 911. And that if I didn't, I wouldn't. And I would just tough it out. And then at one point, and I this is all very fuzzy because of course I had like hallucinogenic fever levels.
Oh boy.
Um, and I was vomiting, just crawling to and from the bathroom. I wasn't able to keep anything down. And also my younger sibling who was trying their best to take care of me while I'm like, stay away. I don't want you to get sick too. Because they also had kind of gone like, oh no, this is not real. And also at the same time, no, like could see how my life was with saying that out loud. So they could not say it out loud. But they had shared
Yeah.
with me that they were like, I also don't agree with this. So they had been instructed to not bring me food, to not bring me water because I was faking.
God.
And so at one point I called one of my best friends, who is still my best friend, and I called her and I was like, what do you do about a fever? She's like, you take aspirin or Tylenol or Motrin. Why? And I was like, I don't have any of that. She's like, are you okay? You sound really bad. And I was like, I think I'm dying. I think I might die. And she was like, oh my God. Oh my God. Okay, okay, okay. Do you need to go to the hospital? I was like, I can't. I don't know. I can't. My parents won't let me. And she was like, okay, can you take anything? And I was like, I don't have anything to take. And she was like, if I bring you something, if my mom and I bring you something, can you get it? And I was like, yes, I'll try. And so she was like, okay. So they went and bought me baby Tylenol, because I was like, I had already tried at this point, like a year prior, to try and take a Motrin or Midol because I was having really extreme period cramps. I'd had to crush that up and drink it in water because I could not choke down a pill because of the psychosomatic, like, you're putting poison in your body.
Yeah.
kind
I
of
have that too. I have
reaction.
to crush pills. Yeah.
Yeah. And so she brought me the baby aspirin. I tried to convince my younger sibling. I was like, my friend Ashley's going to be here. Go get the bag that she's going to hand you. Don't look in it. Don't look in it. You need to not look in it. And they're like, if I can't look in it and you're this freaked out, I'm not going to go get it. I'm not going to get in trouble for you.
Great.
And I was like, fuck, fine. Okay. So I crawled out of bed down into the parking lot. Like I got halfway down the sidewalk before I collapsed. Ashley found me because I took too long and helped me up and got me back into bed and got me medication. And I genuinely credit her with saving my life, because I do think that had I not had that medication, I would have had severe brain damage beyond what I already probably have from concussions and getting kicked in the head by a horse and being stepped on my spine by a horse. Like all of those things, like beyond that, like this probably would have killed me if not done severe damage beyond what I already have. And she has my endless gratitude. She could genuinely just really raucously ruin anything in my life, and I'd be like, she gets a pass.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
She saved your life for sure.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And also
Jeez.
she would never do that. And so like my friend Ashley and her mother became my sister and my parent when I was about 16, 17. And that was the final break. That was when I really understood, like, I'm being deeply abused and actively, and this is not okay. So then at 18, I found my now husband, my partner, and I moved in with him about 6 months at most after knowing him for the first time, 4 months after physically meeting each other, because we met online, and we got married a year after that, roughly. And and then it changed. I stopped being actively abused and I started being passively abused. I started being used as a flying monkey to triangulate against my siblings. I
Mm.
stopped being in the in crowd. Like I wasn't part of the family anymore. I was a separate thing. And so I stopped seeing the abuse that my parents were doing to my siblings. And then that got shattered around the beginning of the pandemic, and I ended up disowning both of my parents. So yeah, and now the only one who still has contact is the second child, and they only have contact with our father, really. And that is even very, very limited and under very extreme boundaries.
Yeah. Have you had therapy and professional
Yes. Yeah.
help?
Around the beginning of the pandemic, when things started to fall apart for me mentally, because like my husband and I have been destitute before. Like we very much have struggled financially in the past. We are in a good place now. But um it was rough. And so I was very much in survival mode. When you're in survival mode, you cannot heal. You cannot heal in the place that hurts you. And being poor is trauma.
Yeah,
Um
100%.
and so it wasn't until we were in a financially secure place, and also we had roommates at the time who are dear friends of ours as well. And they were triggering in ways that I needed to be triggered. I
Mm.
needed to have that kind of like light bulb moment of this is not okay for me. And this is unreasonable levels of reaction to that behavior. And so let me figure that out. And so the day that I chose to go to therapy, my partner had come home. He was very tired. He works nights and he was having to clean the kitchen before he could cook. And so he's frustrated with that because our roommate had not cleaned the kitchen the night before. I was feeling very timid, and also being raised in a tumultuous household like I was, I'm hyper vigilant all the time.
Yeah.
I have to choose to set that down. And so he was not okay, very frustrated, and trying to not create a problem for me with that because he knows what my triggers are. And I was just very emotionally distraught already. And at one point, I'm holding a bowl that I would like to wash so I don't create another dish for him to eat, to have to clean before, to like add to the problem. And I was in his way, and he physically puts his hands on my shoulders, gently and kindly, moves me to the side, and gets the thing that he was looking for. And in that moment, I whispered so quietly he could not hear me, "I love you," because I was looking for reassurance. I was looking for, "I love you too. It's not your fault." And I didn't get it because I said it too quietly. If I
Mm.
had, he would have given me that.
Yeah.
And so I went into a panic attack, a
Mm.
complete spiral, potentially also a meltdown. I'm still sometimes figuring out which one's which because they look similar from the outside.
Yeah.
And a lot of my awareness is perceiving myself from the outside. Um, so I was having a panic attack around that. Um, my one of the roommate that was a woman who was very close to me, she was like, "What's going on?" And I was like trying to tell her what was happening, and she went to my husband. She's like, "Emmy's not okay. Emmy's not okay. You need to go to her." And so he put his upset and his frustration down to try and help me pull me out. And he finally said at one point, he's like, "I need to be able to be upset. I can't be upset around you. I can't be upset with you. If we have problems, I can't tell you about those problems."
You can't walk on
And
eggshells forever. Yeah.
yeah, and he was constantly on eggshells, and I feel so bad about that because it wasn't overtly abusive. I was not trying to create that space. I was just stuck in
Yeah.
that space. So I got into therapy, and I'm a very like internalized person as well. So I like always assume that any problems that exist are because I'm not great. And so I was constantly picking my own psyche apart, and I was like, "Here's what I think." And she's like, "That sounds cool. Yeah, sure, go with that." She was not a great therapist, but it was therapy. It was anything was better than nothing. And then it got me stable enough to go to school. I went into massage therapy. I am now a massage therapist who specializes in trauma and releasing trauma from the body. And I love what I do. And it very much took like the empathy link that I developed, the hypervigilance I developed by being a child of trauma, and took me into a place where I can really use those skills to help other people heal. And I have a lot of gratitude that I got to do that.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm sure it's
and
very
so,
healing for you. I know that for me,
oh yeah,
to be able to be empathetic, to be caring, all the things I didn't get, if I can give those to other people in any way, I find it helps
yes,
me
yeah,
enormously, you know?
that, and also the fact that I like when people ask like, "What's your life? What was your life like?" I'm like, my mother's a covert narcissist, my father's an undiagnosed autistic man, and I was raised in a cult. So anything you throw at me, I've heard it.
Yeah.
Been sexually assaulted, like been abused. Like
Mm.
there's never a point at which I'm going to be like, oh my God, how could you put that on me? I'm going to be like, yeah, that happens. And I will validate you and I will
Yeah.
hold you through that because it's not going to scare me. I have seen the absolute dregs of humanity and I know how bad it can be.
Yeah.
Let's go through it together. And so and it like the only time I do play like trauma Olympics now is to say I had it worse and I'm telling you, you had it bad too. And that's the only time I ever bring it up really anymore. Is just to reassure people that they're not going to scare me and also that they had it bad.
Yeah. And that they're not alone.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
they're not alone,
absolutely.
they're not crazy, they're not overreacting.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure I can imagine your family used that word a lot. My mother certainly did with me. Everything, I was
Yeah.
always overreacting, I was always exaggerating.
Yeah. Or my mother always pulled the you dreamed that.
Huh.
You dreamed that up. That didn't actually happen that way. You made that up with your imagination.
Ugh, the gaslighting. And
Hmm.
again, your mother's a convert, my mother's a convert, so I think they really and they're both narcissists, so they really leaned into that. The gaslighting was like their jam, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, and the way I put like to my current therapist who and I'm her first Christian Scientist client, um although she did have a good basis in like religious trauma and cults, which is why I sought her out. The way I put it to her is that Christian Science is the medical the sorry, the religious um how did I phrase it? It's the religious codification of dissociation,
Mm,
and that you are constantly dissociating from your own experience, from reality, from anything that's uncomfortable, from anything you don't like, and that is how you get along in life.
it's a
And
survival skill,
so,
yeah.
yeah, it's a survival skill, and you learn it very, very early. It's so deeply ingrained in me that I don't always notice that I'm doing it. Other people sometimes have to click me out of dissociation.
Yeah.
And thankfully now that I have the resources I have and all that, I'm able to do it more solidly. I'm able to use grounding techniques and different polyvagal stuff. I have a ton of resources. Like toward the end of this, I'd love to just info dump all the resources I have that I think
Yeah,
might be helpful for others.
definitely.
But so working with those different exercises has helped me feel very grounded in my body. Part of empathy linked massage therapy for me is that I physically take on the posture and the experience of a client and mirror their behavior to such a degree that I can start to feel little aches and pains in my body that guide me toward where the pain is in their body, to the point that they don't even know it's there until I touch it. And so like that's an amazing skill, and it's something that is really, honestly, I feel like a talent that I developed this thing and I cannot teach you how to do it. You just have to have it. And unfortunately, I feel like the way you have to have it is by being traumatized.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
sucks.
it's definitely a a mixed blessing, the personality types and the skills that we develop from having a traumatic Christian Science childhood. Some of those things are actually useful, you
Yeah,
know? I mean, I consider myself hyper vigilant. I think at this age, I've managed to sort of manage it in a way where it doesn't always drive me crazy. But
yeah,
being hyper vigilant made me a good mom, made me
right.
very
Yeah,
responsive, made
you
me,
were, yeah. It may like being hypervigilant makes me a good partner. I can tell when my husband is not okay.
Mhm.
I can hold him through that and also be at this point with the healing I've done, I can be okay with him not disclosing to me what's not okay. There was a time though that because of that hypervigilance, I was like, tell me, tell me, tell me, tell me, tell me, because otherwise I feel like it's me.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's there, it is a mixed bag. It is absolutely a mixed bag. And one of the challenges is being so I recently went back to the physical location of the church that I was raised in, just to like explore the grounds, and look at like make sure it was still there physically the way I thought of it. And part of that was me going and embracing all the good things that
Mm,
happened around the world I was raised in, so that I could be present with the bad things that happen. Because every time, like one of the factors around trauma, especially very complex trauma, is that it's not just the bad things that did happen, it's the good things that did not happen. And all of that weighed against the good things that did happen.
yeah.
And your brain wants to hold on to those good things and dismiss the bad and be like, well, that is all by the side, and bad things happen, but this good is what you want to hold on to. So I was really struggling with being present in the mind space of like good and bad happened. So and bad and good happened. So we went to my husband and I went to the church over my birthday weekend actually, and we just walked around and I was like, oh, this is the property where I was often playing in the yard. My parents mowed the grass, and eventually so did my sibling and I, helped mow the grass and take care of the church's property. And there was a massive wisteria vine in the backyard. We used to play fairies in it,
Mhm.
and that is a joyful memory.
Yeah.
And then also just being able to run and play and have fun. And I was able to remember funny stories. Like at one point we cleaned the windows in the main hall of the church, and that Sunday no less than 10 birds ran into that window,
Oh, no.
which was not funny from the
Yeah.
perspective of like hurt, injured animals, but hilarious in the middle of them reading from Science and Health or the Bible, just bam, and
Mm.
just the dead silence. This is God. Flap. It's just
That didn't just
it's
happen.
by
Heard
yeah, by
nothing.
the fourth one, we were all laughing, and that is a
Yeah.
joyful memory to me. And then also like after church, we always went to this one restaurant. So we went and got absolute trash Tex-Mex, and it was exactly how I remembered it, and it was joyful too.
Yep.
And so now that I have embraced those joyful places and been really present with that, like there was good things that happened in my childhood, and I can hold on to those. I can now be like, oh, and also I was very lonely.
Mhm.
Oh, and also I was neglected. Oh, and also like my reality was dismissed constantly. And it's like I vaguely referred to being sexually assaulted. Like I was molested at 11
Mm.
by an almost 18-year-old boy, and it was handled once and then never acknowledged again. I was expected to still give hugs and kisses to my father and my brother.
Mm.
I was expected to go to sleep that night. I was expected to continue with my schoolwork. And that is also abandonment. I was
Yeah.
abandoned with my feelings and my emotions and my experience in my body being violated. That and that I should just get over it because it's your body is matter.
Yeah. Walk it off.
Yeah, exactly. And so there are just so many overlapping things, and this is kind of part of the difficulty with diet, like like picking apart what your experience is being in this cult, being a child in Christian Science, is that like there's all these overlapping things. Maybe you have a traumatic brain injury that never got acknowledged. Maybe you had a concussion. I was in a car accident where I rolled the car 5 times. It was a Jeep at 90 miles an hour into a culvert. And I walked away with a concussion, and this part of my tricep was like a half moon bruise right through here. And they attributed that I survived not to the fact that I insisted that we wear seatbelts, but that my youngest sibling said, "Remember, God is love," before I left the building. And that child only would say that because it was like a cult-like ritual that anytime any of us left, the youngest would say that because that got them kudos. They were being a good little Christian Scientist. So of course they're going to continue that. It's the only thing that kept them safe. And I would really encourage like other listeners, other former Christian Scientists to really embrace that. Like, yeah, maybe you were fully in it the whole time, but were you fully in it the whole time, or did you have to be fully in it the whole time? Did you have to do that for your own emotional security? Because that's the only way you could get a connection with your parents. We are herd creatures. We are designed to be in community, even if that community is toxic and terrible to us, because being in community is safer than being alone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I found that my adherence to an emotional connection to the physicality of Christian Science, the hymns, the books, the lesson, the rituals, very much my intensity of holding on to those things longer than I should have is largely because, as a friend of mine who was not a Christian Scientist pointed out, they were the source of my comfort.
Yes, absolutely. My parents sang at least 3 hymns to me and my siblings every night before bed. I have a lot of comfort from that memory.
Yeah.
And also it was further indoctrination.
Yeah.
And also I did take the parts, because I have a stepson who's now 18, but I came into his life when he was about 5. And my husband working nights, when we had him for weekends, I was his primary caretaker. So I kept some of that, in that I sang to him, but I did not sing hymns.
Right.
And I made sure I was maybe a little too on the nose about like, take care of your body, because like, are you sick? Like,
yeah.
A little too hyper vigilant about that, because I was so concerned about dismissing him and his experience, because I know I dismiss my own pain. Like, I had to remember that I get to take ibuprofen and acetaminophen because my neck hurts because I slept weird. Like, I have to remember that.
One of the hardest parts for me about
if anyone else is injured, I'm like, do you want medicine? Can we fix it?
Yeah, navigating children's ailments / emotional upsets as a parent for me has been a real learning curve, because as a former Christian Scientist, you so want to make sure that your kids get what you didn't get.
Yeah.
But there's a dark side to that. You don't want to go too far.
Right. And it's also a challenge of like, you want on some level to be the parent that you needed.
Yeah.
And also your child needs the parent they need, not the parent
it's not about you
needed. And
exactly.
and that is a challenge in and of itself. And like, it's a very delicate balance to walk.
Yeah. For sure. So you're out now.
Yes.
You're away from the family. You're out of the house. You're in a good relationship. We both are, kudos to us for pulling that off.
Yeah, I had one of the factors that I am regularly grateful for is that being raised in an abusive household, you are far more likely to return to abusive spaces. Being in one cult makes you likely to be in other cults in the future. It's part of the reason why I feel like multi-level marketing and new thought and all those kinds of spaces are so prevalent in recovery circles, right? And like my father, like thankfully I have a vehement issue with MLMs because my father was in one from the age of like 9 for me. And I saw how detrimental that was to all of our relationships as a household.
Yeah.
And then we went into, after the church closed, or around when the church was getting ready to fall apart, my parents found Landmark, the
Yeah.
Landmark Forum, which was like, we have other levels of like cultish behavior from that, but at least it was something. The problem is that it's pseudo psychology. So it's
Yeah.
just enough for a narcissist to twist.
Uh,
And so then it became, I don't know, it sounds like you know what Landmark is.
I do. Yeah. Recently, I've
Um,
been learning a lot about LGATs, these large group awareness trainings,
yeah,
and all their little tactics and how manipulative it is. And yeah.
yeah. So Landmark, it has enough psychology in it that it can be like, you make your own reality and all that stuff. And it's just enough to be like little Lego pieces with Christian Science. And so like we went into that for a while, and I have similar levels of gratitude for it. I met people who for the first time in my life actually authentically saw me for who I was,
Mm,
wanted me to be nothing other than who I was. They were genuinely good people who happened to be in this environment. And those are people, like, I recently lost one of them. She passed away from cancer, and like thankfully got medical care, because it wasn't this cult, it wasn't Christian Science cult, it was Landmark cult. um but but like, it she was the first person who genuinely wanted to just know who I was,
mm,
and fully accepted me for who that was. And so I have a lot of gratitude for that. um and then also when I, as an adult, was feeling really bereft and very isolated, I went into my third cult of being a LARP group.
oh, yeah.
And yeah, and like I got out of that just before the pandemic. And so even within like that understanding, like the cult level of devotion to a cause, that is where, because I personally believe that anything can be taken to that cult level of devotion.
Yeah, me too.
And so you're just much more primed for that. It's like
Yeah.
gasoline on the ground waiting for a match.
Yeah. And the thing about these especially sort of self-help or psychology groups or self-improvement groups, as opposed to religions where people are typically born in,
Yeah,
is the self-help groups, you're going to meet good people there because they're people that are trying to be good and be better, and they're taking time out of their day, they're spending money to actively be better people and to be self-examining and to change things about their life. So I would imagine you meet a lot of like-minded, thoughtful, reflective,
yeah,
kind people because they're trying to do a thing. They're trying to
yeah,
do something good.
absolutely. Yeah, that is absolutely the case. And it's important to remember that the people make the organization.
Mhm.
The organization does not make those people. And to kind of shift your focus internally on finding those people, not the organization.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you can, I mean, I don't wanna, like, 100% dismiss things like that because I do think people get
No,
things
no,
out
yeah,
of them, and I know that you're
absolutely.
not saying that either. But I think it's super important if you're gonna get involved with something like that to be very aware of controlling tactics. Of the minute you feel like you're not in control of your life anymore, that's when you need to get out.
And the groundwork for that is solid internal boundaries.
Yeah,
One of
yeah.
the biggest challenges for me was understanding that a boundary is not how they are allowed to behave, but how I will handle that behavior. It's not, you can't talk to me that way. It's, if you talk to me that way, I'm leaving.
Mm,
And, or if you talk to me that way, I'm going to limit our contact. Or saying no, I can't do that thing. Like, that's, for me, it's like a bullshit filter.
yeah.
Is like when I have people around me that I'm starting to develop relationships with, I start to kind of break check them a little bit from time to time, not to test them, but to make sure that we have the similar goals in our relationship. That the goal here is for us to meet each other at this little picket fence where we're both safe.
Mm,
And that matters. And as soon as you start moving that fence line into my property, I need to hold that bigger fence.
Yeah, I love that there's so much awareness now of the term boundaries, which was something that we never heard of when we were kids. Not a
Didn't
concept.
hear of, they didn't exist.
Didn't exist, especially for women,
Right. Well, like, who
Anything
needs
goes.
boundaries when your body isn't real?
Right. Yeah. Why would you even have that
Right.
concept if nothing's real?
And then within the scope of narcissism too, there is a degree of like, if you have privacy from the perspective of a narcissist, those are secrets.
Right. And they're
You're
bad.
withholding from
Yeah.
me, not holding your own space. You're withholding from me space I and do.
Ugh.
And that's inappropriate.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my most, may sound petty, but you'll get it. One of my most traumatic childhood events was when my mother read my diary and then
I would,
teased me about things that were in it. Teased me
yes.
actively and got my sister to tease me about things. It was horrible.
So I literally, one of the things that I'm doing for like, I don't so much set New Year's resolutions as I set goals for growth. It's not that I want to work out 3 days a week now. I want to be working out 3 days a week by the end of the year. This is a goal, a mountain I'm climbing. One of those mountains this year is journaling for me because
Mm,
of that. I have a lot of trauma around my words being taken against me, and manipulated and twisted when I write them down. I don't have that problem for typing or for video, which is wild because it's recorded. And my tone matters with how I say something. It's like the phrase, I didn't steal the money versus I didn't steal the
mhm.
money. That's a very different sentence, same words. And so things would be twisted, but my mother, I was given journals as a child and my mother would take them and read them,
Ugh.
and I was either like just like not necessarily always physically hit, but emotionally beaten by writing down my innermost thoughts. Like one that went into my brain was that I wrote my mom is a bitch,
Ooh.
but I misspelled bitch because I was like 7,
Yeah.
and was I was punished for writing that down and upsetting my mother, and for misspelling, and for my penmanship.
Oh,
And it
God.
never occurred to her that she shouldn't have been reading the fucking book.
Yeah. And then maybe she
Like,
was a bitch. How about that?
right, yeah, this is perfect evidence of how you're doing the thing I said.
Yeah. Maybe work on that.
And yeah, so I am now like literally the first page of my journal is me going through like, I have this challenge because of these things. And then I wrote at the very bottom, because my mother is a bitch, all
Yeah.
caps underlined. And that was so validating.
I bet.
Such growth. Like my internal kids were just like, fuck yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So I like
Guitar
that.
solo.
Yeah, yes, exactly. It's finding those, like, healing is finding those little hurdles and seeing them as the big steps they are. That, like, that is where healing happens.
Yeah.
It's in those little shifts and little growths too.
Yeah. Journaling is incredible. I was introduced to it in sixth grade. It was an English project where we all
Yeah.
had to keep a journal, which I think a lot of kids have that in
Yeah.
school. We didn't have school, unfortunately. And I just took it and ran with it, and I never stopped to this
Yeah.
day. I never
Yeah.
stopped keeping, like, a private
Yeah.
journal. That's
Well,
been 40 years now, I'm still doing it. It's great.
yeah. And it's like, it's also important. Like the thing that really pushed me over the edge to like start journaling this year is that I realized, like, for better or worse, we live in interesting times.
Yeah.
And and also I know, because my husband's a hobby historian, how important layman perspectives of historical events are.
Yeah.
And so it is my dream at some point that my journals might be put into a museum. And
Mm,
that might be something valuable for other people to witness, like, oh, other people have lived lives and had it hard, and I'm allowed to too.
definitely. Yeah, I when I was trying to have my first son, I had my kids via sperm donor by
Mhm.
myself, single mom.
Congratulations. That
Thank
is a
you.
hard road to walk.
Not anymore. I ended up getting married later, but which is great. But
Yeah,
the original intent was to have children on my own and just be a
yeah.
single mom
How
purposefully.
can I just pause? How beautiful that your children know 100% they were wanted.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is a beautiful thing.
There were no accidents. There's
No.
no accidents in single mothers by choice, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah. So when I undertook that journey, I hate to use that word, but it works. I started keeping a blog.
yeah,
And it started off as sort of like a trying to get pregnant blog because you have so
yeah,
many feelings at that time. It's such a
yeah.
tumultuous experience that you really
The
need to get
hormones
it out.
alone.
Oh yeah, I mean it was just nuts, nuts and failures and crying and I mean all kinds of horrible things.
Yeah,
But I intended it just to be kind of a pregnancy blog and I'm still keeping it 12 years later. I still write
yeah,
every week and nobody knows about it. It's just this private thing. The family knows it exists, but I don't think they ever really think about it. But I want it to be a journal of our family life so
yeah,
that my boys can look at it one day and read every single thing that happened in their entire lives and
yeah,
what their mother thought about all of that,
yeah,
with their mother's perspective on what
yeah.
they were like and what they did. I
That
hope
is,
that someday they'll read it all, you know?
yeah, that is an incredible legacy, and not just for your kids, but for your potential future generations down their line, should they choose to go that direction, or even just for humanity.
Mhm.
Like, we lose so many stories that are beautiful and rich because they weren't famous.
Right. And we'll
They
just have
didn't.
the news stories, and it's like, well, how
Yeah,
about an ordinary mom with kids in school the day the friggin' school shut down for the pandemic and what that was like,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know? Yeah.
exactly. Like, building your own community is part of the work of healing too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am blessed to have and have I am blessed to have had the work ethic to build the family that I have, my
Mhm.
family and friends. Because like I am now encountering the wider swath of my genetic family, on my paternal side. I have an aunt and two uncles that are my father's siblings. His older brother died of the AIDS pandemic
Mm.
back in the 90s. And so like I have three relatives who are brilliant, beautiful humans, and I am finally getting to know them. And it's also deeply sorrowful in a lot of ways because I am recognizing as I'm learning about them as people and as I'm hearing stories from them about their lives that I missed out on a lot,
Yeah.
that they missed out on a lot with me. And this is something that we both deeply want individually, is like to have this connection, to have this family understanding. And also no one understands what, like, I am ever forever grateful that I have siblings. I deeply believe at the same time my parents should never have had children.
Mhm.
And they certainly should not have had as many children as they had if they were going to have them. They did not have the financial fortitude to provide for those children. And also, thank fuck I am not the only one who experienced that.
Yeah.
Because the validation that we get, like, oh, hey, do you remember when this happened? Oh my God, yes, I do. Like, that is just like, oh, it's like scratching an itch you can't reach and you need a friend to scratch for you. And the relief when that happens.
Yeah. Nobody else
And
understands. My
yeah,
sister and I
no one
always
else
say,
gets it.
"Thank God you were here for all of this," you know?
Yes. And so I'm like re-engaging with those spaces and finding out how they've healed through their lives from being raised under similar circumstances. It's validating to hear their rage. There is some difficulty for them in that they're like, I can't tolerate hearing a lot about it because from their perspective, they feel like they didn't do enough to save us.
Mm.
Whereas I'm like, you tried it all. Like, you did anything at all. I didn't know that. There were people in my wing I didn't know existed there. Holy crap, that's amazing. Like, there's healing in that too. Like, there's just so much that you it's hard. It is exhausting to endure both the ups and the downs. that it's not all ups
Yeah.
coming out of a cult.
Definitely not.
And you'd
Definitely
think
not.
like, oh, that's rock bottom, so it's all up from here. Nope. There are a
Right.
lot of downs too.
Yeah, I love it when I hear cult survivors on podcasts talk about how it's so not a linear
Mm,
recovery, and that even years later you can suddenly hit this low and not
yeah.
even really understand in the moment why. Because I've had
Yeah.
that. It's been
Yeah.
like 20 years since I've really
Sure.
been mentally out of Christian Science, and it's definitely not been all the way out straight line.
If you're comfortable with it, I feel like this is a good segue for me to go into those resources I talked
Yeah,
about
yeah,
before.
definitely.
So one of the things that I'm going to just list off of a series of books, ideally
Yeah.
in order that people like, this is the order I personally would recommend people read them in, would be initially No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz. He is the creator of what's called internal family systems. So the idea of within a family, you have, right, I just perspective here, a mother, a father, a son, and a daughter. And if you have the daughter, for example, being chastised by the mother, and the father is looking at the mother like, what are you on? The daughter might feel more secure challenging the mother's perspective because she perceives that she has someone on her side. This is the upside of triangulation. Um, if, however, the father and the mother are looking at the daughter like, what are you doing? The daughter is not going to like rebut as easily. Um, Parts work, internal family systems, is understanding your own psyche as that structure. So you are simultaneously your infant self, your toddler self, your child, middle school, high school, young adult, mid adult, older adult selves, every piece you've ever been. And that these structures and ways of being and understanding can override who you currently are because of a trauma trigger.
Mm.
So an example for me is that when I am being interrupted, like I'm having a conversation with someone and they interrupt me over and over, or they're like, oh, let me get this on. I start to feel like I'm not being listened to. And I get flooded by the 10-year-old in my head who was never heard. And it's like, see, here's evidence and evidence and evidence for your life for how you've never been listened to, and you need to be angry about this because the only way you get listened to is when you yell about it. And so internal family systems is being able to see that happen in your own mind and go, whoa. And out on the outside, go, I need you to pause. Give me just a second. And then you go inside and you talk to the 10-year-old and you go,
Mm.
hey, deep breaths. That is not what happened. They do want to listen to you. Here is evidence to the contrary of what you were stating. Here is how we know this is true. And I don't need you to be in charge right now. This is a grown-up conversation. You're 10. I need you to take a step back. Take a deep breath. Go play. You're allowed to go play. You don't have to be here doing this. Because from their perspective, and I do encounter them as almost like separate entities at this point, that there's a point at which you're able to be the parent to yourself that you needed at the time. So I regularly now through IFS, I take myself out on little play dates. I go to the park and I swing on the swing set, which is very regulating to my autistic brain and body, and also very joyful. There's a lot of endorphins in pumping your legs and swinging. I play on play sets at night. Like I go to the park and I just run up and down the stairs and I play on the slide, and no one has any problem with it because who's watching?
And if they are, who cares?
And yeah, and my teenage self gets to listen to curse word music and eat junk food and go to the mall and be a teenage dirtbag. And I have clothes that kind of help me feel more in that space so that these parts of myself get to be expressed and be present. I also regularly go into that internal world, which at this point now has a cottage and rooms for each piece of myself. And during the holidays and my birthday, I get gifts for each piece of myself
Mm.
that I purchase for myself, and then I get to unwrap. And so like this year was The Sims. I downloaded The Sims, and that was for my teenager. Um, so internal family systems is a really helpful to like go back into. It's also helpful to be paired with EMDR, as I understand it, though I have not gotten into EMDR myself. Um, it's helpful to have that structure in order to very much more easily be like the adult self in this moment, going in and correcting what happened, so that the memory is not flooding you every time. The next book I would recommend would be, after that one, would be Healing Trauma by Peter Levine. That's Levine. And that book is on polyvagal theory. So polyvagal theory is about the physical experience of trauma and how the body physically, hormonally gets flooded, and how pain in the body can be from past traumas, and resolving those past traumas through experiencing the body. They have exercises, both of them, on how to go through that, though it is very much recommended that you have a therapist of your own, who is at least passingly familiar with these spaces, so that you can have a support that's not you, or your partner, because that is an unreasonable burden to put on a partner. And then after polyvagal theory, with the healing trauma, would be somatic internal family systems, which is kind of the pairing of the two, the somatic being the body, internal family systems being the mind. So somatic internal family systems by Susan McConnell. And that also has Richard Schwartz's input on it. After that one, I heard in a previous episode, someone recommended The Body Keeps the Score. I do not recommend that book for a couple of reasons. One is that it is deeply re-triggering, re-traumatizing. The author, for all of his good that he has done by building this book, the first chapter or two takes you through a very intense, inappropriate attack that a soldier did on a Vietnam village, and asks you to have empathy for that person's life. And that is very difficult for people who have been traumatized.
Yeah.
It also reads more like an academic book than a self-help book. And most people are going into this from the self-help aspect. So what I would recommend instead of that, if I can find it, is The Body Never Lies by Alice Miller. And reportedly, the Body Keeps the Score is largely based off of Alice Miller's work. She was heavily censored by the psychological community as a whole. And specifically, The Body Never Lies comes at things from the perspective of how deeply traumatizing the fourth commandment is. The fourth commandment being, honor thy father and thy mother, or you will live a short and painful life.
Ugh.
And so she takes that kind of perspective. She has other books, though I have not read those. I have listened and read to this one. So yeah, The Body Never Lies is very foundational. And then the last one I would really recommend people starting with, and I'm happy to give more feedback in the future of other books that have been helpful for me. But the other one would be Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay Gibson. And that book is less pathologizing. In fact, all of these books are very non-pathologizing. But Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, even if your parent was a narcissist, even if your parent was mentally disordered somehow, chances are they were also emotionally immature. And if you are likely to fall into similar patterns again, that would be the place to start understanding boundaries and start understanding the psyche of these other people in order to prevent you from being injured by them in the future. So yeah, those are the 4 books I'd recommend starting with in that order.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that, and I cannot speak highly enough of a good therapist. And a good therapist being a person that you're bummed you can't be besties with.
Yeah.
It's a person that you should be like, damn, I wish we could just get coffee and I didn't have to pay you $100 and something in order to talk to you for just an hour.
Yeah, I love
You
finding
pick
a
your
person
brain,
like
it'd be
that.
great.
Like, I wish we could be friends.
Yes. Yeah. And if you wouldn't be friends with your therapist, you should not have that therapist. You should find another one. And that
Hmm.
is valid. You're not causing any kind of they are trained how to handle that. You're not going to hurt their feelings. And if you do, that's their fucking problem. And they have a therapist of their own, or they should have a therapist of their own. So yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So I guess is there anything else you wanted to bring up before I get to the final two questions?
Hmm. Just a reminder that while many of us have felt really, really lonely, you don't have to feel alone. It is hard to let people know 100% of your soul and who you are, especially when you don't know if you can trust them yet. But trust is built off of trusting. You have to find what the smallest, littlest way of trusting is for you and start there and build from there. It's like a staircase. You don't go straight up. It's one step at a time. And if a person shows you that they are not trustworthy in that way, then that's as far up the staircase as you go right now. And you are allowed to mourn that you can't go higher.
Mm.
And it's allowed to be hard. You don't have to pretend like everything's okay. One of the biggest challenges for me was finding language that allowed me to be authentic without trauma dumping on other people. So like there's the common thing of people going, hey, how's your day? And the response you give is great. It's not always great. Saying, I'm here. That's factual. That's real.
Yeah, finding the
Um,
line between not being fake and then trauma dumping has been
yeah,
hard for me.
yeah. And well, it's also the thing too, like one of the factors that was really hard for me is I felt like if I started, I'd never stop.
Yeah.
If I told them the tiniest detail, I can't help
Yeah.
but tell them everything. And then also like that holds with emotions too. I was terrified. I didn't have access to crying for a long time because I was terrified that if I started, I'd never stop. It
Hmm.
felt like a tsunami. But through the lens of polyvagal theory, one of the things that you learn is that if you let an emotion be 100% present, it lasts 90 seconds.
Mm.
And you've endured so much worse for so much longer. You can give yourself 90 seconds to be fully present to your emotions. And it
You mean,
hurts.
yeah. So you mean just denying it and pretending it doesn't exist doesn't work?
Oh, not well, that and also like diminishing it.
Yeah.
It's like if you have a gallon worth of water pressure and you're pushing it through a syringe, it's going to take forever. If you open it up, it's all done.
That's an
And
excellent way of looking
yeah,
at it. Yeah.
it's hard. It does not make it easier, but I can hold my breath. So yeah,
That's
that's
great.
that's the last thing I really have for the listeners and for
That's
myself.
excellent. I feel I'm anticipating now. I can feel people just getting so much out of this because you have so much wisdom
Thank
to
you.
share from your studies and your career path and the things you've had to learn.
Yeah.
And thank you so
And
much for passing that on for us.
yeah, and to anyone in the Facebook group or who's listening to this, my username on Facebook is MEEMI Lindley, LINDLEE. And I am happy to be a resource in this way. I'm happy to give feedback if people are looking for good therapists in their area. One of the things I do professionally with my clients is find them a selection of therapists that will have the skill sets they need. I'm happy to help interface with that if people are looking for therapists and don't know where to start.
That's
That is
great.
somewhere that I'm happy to help people.
Terrific. Yeah, because I know that can be very, very intimidating.
Yeah, intimidating, and also you don't know what all the words mean,
Yeah.
and what is this kind of therapy versus that kind of therapy, and what's more effective for people coming out of a cult, and who have been the children of narcissists and stuff like that. And I would argue that every person who was raised in Christian Science has narcissistic wounds, because I do believe Mary Baker Eddy was a covert narcissist.
Yeah.
And what is it with cult leaders always having 3 names? Not always, but it seems like there's a lot of them.
Common. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I guess, I mean, I kind of feel like the final questions are just so superfluous at this point, but I'll ask them anyway in case something
Yeah,
new
yeah,
comes up.
totally.
But so in your opinion, is Christian Science a cult?
Yes. Yeah. Like I said earlier, I believe anything can be taken to a cult level. Baseball, that can be a
Yeah.
cult. If you're going every day and a couple times, or every week and a couple times a week, and half your wardrobe is based off of the baseball team, and you're finding that your other relationships outside of this baseball experience are faltering, and you're finding it's cutting into your life and your work, that's a cult.
Yeah. For sure.
And I think that all of those things, like the bite method, or the bite model, being like a rubric for cults,
Hmm.
that's also a thing. So I think that every box that could be ticked at this point, Christian Science does tick. And even as like the mother church and the board of directors shifts things, and now there's like medicines allowed, I guess, it still puts too high of a demand on its members.
Yeah. For
And
perfection and yeah.
and that by and of itself is cult behavior.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. And so in your opinion, was Mary Baker Eddy a true believer or a con artist or somewhere in between?
I think, yeah, somewhere in between. I think you can't live the way she lived and not believe your own bullshit. Narcissists, like Todd said, do believe their shit doesn't stink. Um, and also, one of the factors around like a narcissist's psyche is that they are incapable of taking accountability. They cannot acknowledge that they are at fault in any way, shape, or form, because that is a direct injury to their own psyche. It hits their trauma wounds, because most narcissists were also traumatized. It's very rare that you have a person whose brain is just truly like there's a thing, like a wire twitched wrong, that causes their brain to behave this way. Most of the time it is because they went through their own traumatic experiences, and this is how they survived.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's been successful. They continued to survive. And to the psyche, to the brain, to the body, survival is the point, not success.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think Mary Baker Eddy, based off of what I know of her history, and I will preface that I have not done a hugely deep dive into the history of Christian Science or Mary Baker Eddy. I know like very broad things, but I would say she probably had some level of trauma. And the being raised in a semi-Calvinist household, that is like Calvinist nonsense is traumatic in and of itself. And so, like, with all of that, I can't imagine she didn't have some level of trauma. And with how volatile she behaved, covert narcissism sounds accurate. And also, like, being as embedded as I am in the psychology community, arguably the DSM could be boiled down to like 30 pages on trauma and 5 pages of diagnosis.
Mm.
It does not need to be as thick as it is. The vast majority of issues mentally are trauma based.
Mm.
And so I think there's evidence that her becoming a cult leader helped her survive.
Yeah.
And when you're surviving, you will perpetuate anything you have to continue surviving.
She survived a long
Including,
time. She
she
survived
sure
till
did.
90, 91, which is
Yeah.
incredible on
And
many levels.
arguably she lived past that because we're still talking about her.
Right, exactly. She's still very present. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I absolutely believe that she was a charlatan in some ways. And I believe that she was absolutely a genuine believer in some ways. I
Yeah.
think that much like all of us who have been through it have tried and tried and tried and believed and believed and believed in our whole entire being until you just couldn't deny the reality anymore. And then it's a deep wound, except for her deep wound was to herself, her own narcissistic tendencies. And in that scenario, unless you have the resources to heal from that narcissistic behavior, you're just going to double down.
Yeah. And
I,
certainly in the 19th century.
yeah, I, so this is a factor that I assign to my parents. One of the reasons why I don't have contact with them is because the only contact I could have at this point would either be based around anger or pity. And they would not receive my anger and they would loathe my pity. And I think Mary Baker Eddy would too,
Mm,
because I do pity her. She was a clearly very desperately alone woman who had her child taken away from her or sacrificed from her
mm,
at some point. She lived a very alone life. She lost multiple husbands. And I really wonder how happy those relationships were in the first place. She was living in a world where women were given very little and could only have what they took by force. And anytime she married, she had to at least hope that they would not take everything from her.
mm.
And when you're in that space, I don't begrudge you being manipulative. It's the only way you can get your needs met.
Yeah.
So I feel like I feel like the answer is yes to all of the above. Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely think of her from a historical and feminist perspective of what her life must have been like and how she had to fall back on coercion as a survival technique.
Mhm.
And she can't 100% be blamed for doing that,
Right.
you
And
know?
there is something to be said for like an argument around being a product of her time. I don't
Yeah.
know if you've done any like research around what medicine looked like in the 1890s. It was a nightmare.
Yeah. It was gnarly.
If anyone wants like a semi funny factor around that, the Dollop has a couple of the Dollop is a podcast with comedians that they talk about historical events in America. And the Enlightenment and the medical industry episodes are really enlightening for what medicine looked like at the time. And really and truly, there was a degree of there's ghosts in your blood. Do cocaine about it. Like, and
Here's
when
some
you're
leeches.
right, here's some leeches. Here's some morphine for your cough. Like when you're talking about that level of stuff and that like yeah genuinely like if you had a minor malady it probably will go away on its own. The body is an amazing healer. We have nanobots in our bodies all the time. They're called red blood cells and white blood cells. Like their job is to keep us whole and hale. And so yeah, at the time ignoring most of your injuries would result in better results than going to some quack ass doctor where there was no real medical board or testing. They would just experiment on you.
Yeah.
And
Would actually be
like that's
harmed rather than
yeah,
helped.
yeah, you are more
Yeah.
likely to be harmed. And so like at the time I give it a pass.
Yeah.
And the time for it has passed.
Yeah. It really should have died with her, you know,
Yes.
and been this sort of odd little quirky Victorian story about American history, and instead it just dragged on and on and on.
Yes.
But
Yep.
it's dying out, so we can all sort of celebrate that. It'll be gone
Yeah.
soon.
I'm looking forward to the eventual purchasing or closing of Principia. If that ever happens, I will be throwing a watch party of sorts.
Yeah, or going where it seems like it's going, where it's just becoming an ordinary college that
It's gonna
doesn't have
become
Christian
an ordinary
Scientists at it
college with a weird background.
with a weird background. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been so great, Emmy. I'm so glad to
Oh,
talk to
thank you.
you. And
And just thank you for again for create I know I mentioned this in our brief phone call, but thank you for creating this platform for this space. I mentioned to you privately, like several individuals encouraged me to write about my story from my posts and stuff. And every time I tried to put it down, it was just like I can't find the words in the right way, and I just need to word vomit this out.
mhm.
And so thank you for creating a space for that. I I would also like to acknowledge, like, while it can be healing to hold other people's burdens, it is a heavy thing to take on. So thank you for
Oh, thank
doing
you.
incredibly hard work.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I had a moment where I was about 5 episodes in where I was like, I think my mental health isn't so great because I hadn't thought about this stuff in a long time. I just sort of put it away, and my mother's been gone for a while now, and I kind of stopped being angry at her, and I was ready to move on. But I don't know what it was. Something just compelled me in this moment. I was
Yeah.
like, you know what? I think I'm in a good enough place where I can talk about this stuff without it messing me up, and with a certain amount of humor,
Mm.
um, which I think is important.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
but
You
it
can't
has been
laugh or don't
hard.
cry.
It's been hard digging it all back up.
Yeah.
It's certain things I forget how bad they actually were, and I'm like, "Oh, yeah."
Yeah.
And hearing other people's pain, as an empathetic person, it's
You
hard.
can't help but pick it up a little bit.
Yeah, you do pick it up, yeah. But
Yeah.
I'm past that. I think I had it sort of a low minute, and now I'm back on, like, you know what? This is a
Well,
good endeavor. I feel like I'm doing a good thing, so
one of the things, just like as a, a one person who holds people's trauma to another person who holds people's trauma, one of the things that was the most effective for me personally, and it may not be for everybody, is grounding techniques, specifically putting my feet in grass
Mm,
and acknowledging my reality in the moment. I have a YouTube or a TikTok video. I'll send you in a little bit that shows me doing that thing. But grounding techniques are very helpful for letting go of other people's stuff so that you can just be centered in self.
mm. Yeah, that's excellent. I was actually planning on doing a little hike after this, so
Oh, perfect. I'll send it to you
being in
just after this then.
being in nature, being in the world.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lily.
It's been great talking to you. I'm certainly open to a part 2 if you have more
Yes.
you wanna discuss.
I
So
am an endless font of fuck this Christian Science things.
okay, good. Apparently, I am too. I thought I was done with it, but here we are.
Yep.
All right.
You
Thanks
have a
so
lovely
much.
hike.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks for listening to Leaving Christian Science. Disclaimer: I'm not an expert, I'm not a historian, I'm not a therapist, I'm just an ordinary, imperfect human who had the misfortune of being born into Christian Science. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and do not necessarily represent those of the host. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional, medical, legal, or psychiatric advice.